In this video, I'll show you a really clever method to make two pieces of wood fit together in such a satisfying way that you're going to be looking all over your shop for scraps to do this. Honestly, this is going to make you feel like a woodworking master. One of the projects that we've had going on behind the scenes is a large dining table with a post and beam base made from 4x4s. This sort of structure can be challenging because of all the joints that have to be flush. You can't just cross two pieces of wood together, nail them, and call it good. That wouldn't be particularly strong and it would look like garbage. So we're doing lap joints, which are relatively simple. You just remove half the thickness of two pieces of wood and you put them together. The problem is in getting the fit perfect without a bunch of fussing around. And this is especially challenging when your joint is in the center of a workpiece rather than at the end. But the way I do it is so simple and it works perfectly every time. First, I'll show you how to do end laps. Then I'll show you how to do a cross lap. And finally, I'll show you how to do them at an angle like we did for our table. I'll be using a table saw, but the same thing can be done with a router table and a straight bit. If you do use a table saw, a dado set can make the job easier, but it's not necessary. You can use a regular saw blade as long as it cuts a reasonably flat-bottomed kerf. A flat grind rip blade is your best bet. The whole key to this process is this little scrap of wood. It must be exactly as thick as your saw blade so that it fits inside the kerf it cuts perfectly. Take some time to get this right. Then you can save it and reuse it every time you make lap joints in the future. Again, it doesn't matter if you're using a regular blade like I am, a dado set of any thickness, or a router bit of any diameter, 1/4, 3/4, 8 millimeter, whatever. Just make the shim to match. I'm attaching a wooden sacrificial fence to my miter gauge. I like it to extend several inches past the blade. You'll see why in a minute. Here are the two pieces I'm going to connect with an end lap. I've marked the mating faces to help keep everything straight. I also have another scrap of the same material that I'll use to set my blade height. This is the first clever tip in this process. I'm not going to measure the thickness of the wood. I'm just going to raise my blade by eye to just below its center point. Then I'll make a cut on that face, flip it over, and cut on the opposite face. I'll repeat those two cuts a few times, slowly raising my blade higher until the final pass just skims off the remaining fibers. Now I know the blade height is set to exactly half the thickness of my workpiece. Now I'll take one of my workpieces, or a scrap that's of exactly the same width, and I'll place its edge against the blade's teeth and its end against my miter fence. That's why I made the fence a little extra long. It gives me room to clamp a stop block right up against the workpiece. Now here's the clever part. I want to cut away this much from the end of my mating workpiece so the two can fit together, right? But if I put the end of that piece right against the stop block, my first cut will be too far to the right. It's because the thickness of the blade has to be deducted from the stop block's position. This is where the shim comes in. I'll put it between the end of my workpiece and the stop block, shifting the workpiece back so the first cut will fall in the precise location it needs to be. That is all there is to this setup. Just use one workpiece to set your stop block, then the shim to offset the blade, and you're ready to cut. It really couldn't be simpler, and it's virtually impossible to screw up. The wider your blade or router bit is, the fewer passes it'll take to remove the waste. But after you repeat the process on both ends of your workpieces, you'll have a perfectly fitting end lap joint, flush on all the edges and surfaces every single time. Now what about cross laps? These look more challenging because the fit has to be more precise, but it's just as simple. I've marked on my workpiece where I want the cutout to be. I'm aligning the blade to the left of that line, technically outside my cutting area. That's where I'll set my stop block. Now if your miter fence is not long enough because your lap joint is in the middle of a long workpiece, you can just use your table saw's rip fence as the stop block. Now I'll use the shim just as before to compensate for the blade's thickness and make my first cut. Next, I'll replace the shim with the mating workpiece, or a scrap of the same width, and I'll make a second cut at that offset. Finally, I remove all the waste in between. By using the mating workpiece as a second shim, the width of the cutout will be perfect, and the fit will be so satisfying that you'll be calling your friends to come and see what a master you are. Okay, let's complicate it just a little bit and cut one at an angle. Actually, it's not that complicated. In this case, the angle was 10 degrees, so the end of the workpiece is cut to 10 degrees, And the miter gauge is also set to that angle in relation to the blade. The edge of the stop block is also beveled to that angle, as is the edge of the shim. Keeping these angles consistent will cause all your stops and shims to just fit together nicely. Then the process is exactly the same. As you can see, we used a dado stack to remove the waste faster this time. The dado thickness doesn't matter as long as the shim matches. Same thing if you're using a router bit. We still have a lot of work to do on the table, but all those lap joints are not as intimidating as they first appeared, not even the angled ones. Now I have something special for you. IsoTunes, the makers of the amazing Bluetooth hearing protection that I use, has given me a special 30% off discount code that applies to almost everything on their website. This is 3 times the discount I usually get, but it's only good for a limited time. All the details, including the link and the code that you're going to need, are in the video description below, and I also pinned them to the top of the comment section. Now, if you aren't already aware, this is a small family business that I've been supporting for years because they make top quality hearing protection, both in earmuff and earbud form. And they also can be used to listen to music or audiobooks or podcasts or whatever you like. I find that I'm far more likely to protect my ears when the tools are on for just that 1 or 2 cuts if I already have my ear muffs or my earbuds on because I'm listening to something when the tools are off. And before you say, isn't music distracting when you're using a table saw? Well, that's why there's a pause button on the side. Anyway, if you've had some of these on your wish list, you are not likely to get a better deal than this. So use the link below and pull the trigger while you can. Your ears will thank you.